Wilt extol the invisible corners of a thirsty earth with an exaltation of decay and reclamation. Best described as noise ambient, Wilt is an aural quagmire of dusty vapors and ivy-draped relics, grading erosions and the thorny shadows that rise and fall across dying landscapes. Wilt is the long-running project of James P. Keeler, which he established in 1998. The original concept for Wilt arose in 1995 when James was the vocalist in a death metal band called Children. The band would have these sound breaks where echoing screams met droning guitars and soothing synthesizers, and it was during these moments that James's curiosity was piqued for the potential of noise and ambience working together. The band broke up in 1996. Shortly thereafter, he discovered artists like Merzbrow, Steve Roach, and Vidna Abana, and was inspired to start working with sound as a form of art. The name Wilt is based on one of his early paintings and felt like the perfect metaphor for the sounds he wanted to create. A flower, something idealistically associated with beauty, will die. The process of wilting is an evolution to death. The flower passes through shades of color to reach a final standstill, and it is at that point that most do not consider a flower a thing of beauty anymore. Yet it is. A thing of decomposed beauty. A flower wilting seemed to be the perfect metaphor for Wilt. Wilt is the sonic exploration of natural and unnatural sounds, the sounds of the living and the dead. Wilt's earliest sound designs were minimal soundscapes intended to be played with exhibitions for paintings and installations. Since that time, Wilt has explored deeper areas of sonic manipulation, including noise, sound collage, post-industrial, dark ambient, and ambient noise. Over the years, James has released literally dozens of albums, EPs, and splits. 119 releases, according to Discogs, although there's probably even more. He has also worked with labels such as Cryonic Mind, Ad Nauseum, No Part of It, Hospital Productions, as well as many others, and several of his albums are self-released too. Nowadays, there are several bands or projects using the moniker Wilt. However, James has stated on many occasions and maintains that he was the first to use the name. I should also mention that Wilt has an occasional second member since 2004, Dan Hall, who provides guitar on some recordings. A few months ago, James sent me several albums of his that he's released throughout his career, all with a distinctive sound and approach, but at the same time, somehow familiar and unmistakably Wilt. These albums are Radio 1940, Cemetery Gates, Dead Electronics, From Depths Profound and Inconceivable, Cold War, Cold World, The Trough of Armageddon, Radio Warfare, and Crip Gloom. Well then, let's take a closer look at these albums that James sent me, shall we? So up first is Radio 1940. This is one of Wilt's earliest records, originally put out in 2002 and released by Ad Nauseum Records. It's an ambitious 2-CD set that covers about 122 minutes of music and more or less pays tribute to 1940s culture, people, literature, and anything you could think about 1940s, really. A very interesting time period, of course. I guess most people, of course, are going to think about World War II, which was a huge part of the first part of the decade there, and the effects were obviously felt for years afterwards. And obviously, in 1941, the United States became involved in World War II when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The sounds of this album are really just all over the place, and lots of people, or most people, will call Wilt noise ambient. I think that could be sort of a deterrent in some ways, because people are thinking, again, like, noise and ambient, how does that go together? But in a very strange sort of way, a lot of the music on this is very, very soothing, because the noisier characteristics are presented in almost, just like in an ambient sort of form. It's not overly abrasive or ear-piercing sounds, and
there's just quite a bit going on in this record. There's like some spots that like it sounds almost like kind of like glitchy ambient, if you maybe know what I'm talking about, or again some more noisier pieces. But then there's like some pure dark ambient or drone pieces. There's even a slightly melodic touch on some of these tracks too. It's a very interesting record, and one that out of the bunch these sent me, probably the one I've listened to the most. And just if you're new to Wilt, this is definitely a great place to start. Alright then, hopping ahead to 2009, we have Cemetery Road, Dead Electronics. Another 2 CD set put out by Ad Nauseam Records. Cemetery Road is probably one of the most interesting records that I have heard from Wilt so far, as it really does away with any of the noisier characteristics that I guess are otherwise associated with this project. This album has a very, I guess, sort of a gloom ambient kind of sentiment to it. And truth be told, if I still owned a Walkman, I would have loved to have gone walking through a cemetery early in the morning or late in the evening and, had this playing in my ears, because I think it really would have paired well. It also has this sort of, I don't know, it has a sort of Lovecraft kind of feel to it too. But mind you, this came out in 2009 before all the tentacle monster madness blew up in the dark ambient scene. But really, really interesting record. And then there's like a more subtle, sort of melancholy and, actually kind of melodic touch to this record too. Really interesting. And this is also one of the albums that features Dan Hall playing guitar. And there's sort of this, this sort of mixture between like the electronics and the ambience and like the Dan's slowly plucked guitar chords. It has this almost this kind of like weird sort of like, like Old West kind of feel to it at times too. It's a really interesting record. One that I don't know I've ever heard anything exactly like it, but it's definitely an interesting entry in the Wilt discography because it really kind of does away with those more noisier characteristics that's often associated with James's work. So in the second disc, Dead Electronics it features 2 more Wilt songs. And then it's basically just various remixes of old Wilt songs, here recreated by bands like Climax Denial, Theologian, what else we got here? Locrian, Sickness, and Veil of Secrecy, a really underrated project. Just to mention a few, but this one kind of then offered up more of the kind of that noisier side of Wilt again. I mean, it's not bad. It just doesn't necessarily complement the first album very well. It would have been more interesting to see these artists sort of, I guess, tackle the style that's already on display on Cemetery Road. But nevertheless, it's just, a little more harsh, a little more industrial, and, more noisy ambient. But regardless, I think it's fantastic. So definitely check it out. That is Cemetery Road and Dead Electronics. Alright, hopping ahead to 2015, we have From Depths Profound and Inconceivable, released by Fall of Nature. And disregard the pungent stench sticker on there. I didn't have any other spare jewel cases, and some of the stuff that James sent me did not have jewel cases. So anyway, this is another really interesting and really good Wilt album. But I think the first thing that really stood out to me was that it has this much different logo, and my first thought was like, wow, that looks much more black metal-like to me. And it definitely fits more so with what's going on in this music. On this disc, we're presented with more of a death industrial sound. There's much more abrasive and harsh electronics intermingled with some heavy electric guitars, and then there's, occasionally some screamy vocals and stuff like that. It kind of reminds me at times of like Brighter Death Now or Death Stench, that kind of stuff. Really cool, but then of course there are some more, dark ambient moments too, or just some more noisy ambient moments too, but definitely a harsher take from James here in this one. Just really good though. I really like this one. It really stood out, and I'm kind of curious now to dig even deeper into his discography to see if he has more stuff like this, which he probably does. But a really good one here, especially if you want something has that almost sort of, almost underlining black metal characteristics, so to speak. But really good. From Depths Profound and Inconceivable. Alright, continuing on in 2021, we have the Trough of Armageddon, which is a full-on collaboration between Gruntsplatter and Wilt. This is a 2-disc set, and if you haven't already realized this, Wilt puts out a lot of music, and a lot of times these albums are 2 discs and, somewhere in the hour and a half range of things. So there's quite a bit to endure, but what I found to be really interesting about Wilt is that it's one of those projects where it can't really be background noise, like if you're doing something. You've really just got to find a comfy spot and just kind of really absorb it and let it slowly sink in. And this was one of those albums that just that. And again, we're dealing with pure noise ambient here, but there's this strange sort of relaxation to this music. I don't know what that means about my mind, but I feel like a couple of years ago or something like that, I would not have been into this at all, but I really like this, and I found parts of this to be very soothing. In particular, the second disc was much more dark ambient, whereas the first one is much more noisy ambient, but either way, there's still those noisy characteristics scattered throughout the whole thing. But yeah, this was put out in 2021 by Phage Tapes and Cypher Productions, a 2-disc set, and it's phenomenal. Really just great stuff here. I mean, a lot to endure, but my goodness, man, this is really, really good. So yeah, that's the Trough of Armageddon. In 2002, Phage Tapes released Cold War, Cold World, Zeitgeist Movement Volume 3. And this is, believe it or not, one of the shorter Wilt albums. Well, it's 60 minutes, but short by Wilt standards. So, what we have here is a very, I guess I would probably label this as like industrial ambient. It has very much this, I guess this sort of like conjured up, like, sort of this imagery of like Chernobyl and this just like sort of like nuclear fallout kind of feel to it. There's nothing melodic at all in this recording, and it's definitely, more industrial and just more elusive sounding and mysterious, but still atmospheric and, just, I don't know, man. This guy makes really good music, I guess is the overarching point of everything I'm doing here with this video. But yeah, man, this is just really great stuff. Definitely more industrial ambient and, some noisier parts that, maybe would be more abrasive for some people, maybe not necessarily for me personally, but, we all have our different tastes when it comes to that kind of stuff. But, definitely a more industrial ambient, or again, maybe if you just want to generalize and call it noisy ambient. But the main thing I've noticed when I really sat down and listened to all these albums, and none of them really sound exactly alike. And if you're not a great observer of this kind of music, like all of it's just going to be like, what is this? But like, I've obviously, as you guys know, I've been listening to this kind of music for well over 20 years now, so I can really pick out those little nuances between tracks and albums and all that. And it's just really interesting because I've sat down and probably listened to every one of these albums at least 3 or 4 times now, and it's been really rewarding, just really just kind of making notes as I go along the way and just really analyzing them and really taking it all in and really absorbing it. So yeah, Cold War, Cold World. Up next is Crip Gloom, which was released in 2020 digitally through Wilt's own Bandcamp site, but was more recently released in physical format through No Part of It Records. Crip Gloom is part 3 in a trilogy of albums inspired by 19th century poet Percy Shelley. And this is sort of like, this album basically contains different mixes and different versions of the songs that I believe are already on the other albums. Interestingly, and I guess I've already kind of made this point clear, that this is another just really diverse and different take of sound from Wilt. It doesn't sound like the previous album. That's so fascinating to me. This album has an undeniable sort of gothicness to it, I guess. It just has its sort of gloom, and then it has like this feeling of maybe like exploring some sort of like subterranean crypt or something like that. It's very interesting, very fascinating, and I really like this. There's a certain amount of, there's some melody and melodic parts, especially in the first song, an Opera of Failures, which I really liked a lot. But yeah, mostly a lot of it's more dark ambient and drone fare, and but yeah, just really cool stuff, and just definitely a different feel, and just not, it doesn't sound exactly like the other ones. So yeah, really cool stuff, and awesome that No Part of It Records brought this one to a physical format too. And finally, put out earlier this year by Hospital Productions, we have Radio Warfare, a fancy looking cassette tape in this nice little clamshell box. So Radio Warfare has a very sort of post-war kind of feel to it. This is almost what I would imagine the atmosphere around like all of the bombings in Germany and Japan and so on and so forth would have sounded like after the fact. This is sort of like the dust settling, the life obviously being highly disturbed and blown to pieces, and then just, you know, things sort of just kind of like slowly coming back together. This has a very sort of drony characteristic with some occasional noisy characteristics as well, but very atmospheric and very, very dark. Definitely more of a dark ambient release overall, but really cool stuff. And I just, as I've already said, you know, it's just great to, you know, really sit down and analyze all these records. This was one I really enjoyed a lot. It comes in this, you know, this cool little clamshell box, as you can see there. I dropped the insert, but really cool little stuff there. So yeah, Radio Warfare. Alright everyone, I hope you've enjoyed this Wilt special. I hope if you watched this to the very end, you've learned a little bit more about Wilt and you go and check out this project. As I've already kind of pointed out, there really isn't any two albums that sound exactly alike, and I find it to be really fascinating. And obviously, as we've kind of discussed and realized here, James has his own sound. It's just the Wilt sound. I mean, sure, you could call it noise ambient, you could call it dark ambient, you could call it noise music, you could call it whatever you want, but I think it's the Wilt sound. So from here on, I would highly recommend you go to James's Bandcamp. I wish he had stuff on Spotify, but that's not the case. I guess he's just not into that idea, and it kind of makes sense with all the other bands named Wilt out there. There'd obviously be some crossover confusion with all that. So go to his Bandcamp site, check some of it out, stream it, buy it, just check it out. I mean, he's got albums relatively cheap. The merch, several of these albums are under $10, and as I've already pointed out, they're well worth getting your hands on. So please check it out. Thank you, James, so much for sending this stuff. This was a lot of fun, just, you know, all these different times I sat down and listened and analyzed these albums, and I'm definitely, at some point in time, definitely going to check out more of your stuff, too, because, as I mentioned earlier in this video, James has over 100 releases, and that's freaking amazing. So definitely, the adventures and just the amount of music to take in is almost endless in this case. So, anyway, yeah, check out Wilt. Thanks again, everyone. Hope you enjoyed this. Bye.